Guys, Mr. G here. Today I want to talk to you about the last two letters in our acronym MAIN to help explain the causes of World War One. So the two today are imperialism and nationalism. So you're going to want to open up this graphic organizer in Google Classroom, or if I sent it to you in an email. What I want to draw your attention to on this first slide here is this poster of what is the United States fleet and Lady Liberty. She's dressed for battle. She's got a breastplate, massive sword. She's wearing the American flag, and she's got the entire Navy behind her with lots of guns and lots of ships. So, why this matters? So, our big question we're going to be asking today is, how did imperialism and nationalism contribute to the start of World War One? So nationalism also doesn't disappear after World War One, which is part of why what we're going to talk about today matters so much, is because it contributes to the start of it, nationalism, but it doesn't just disappear. In fact, nationalism, because it doesn't disappear after World War One, helps things get a lot worse in the future. Hint, hint, World War Two. Nationalist movements have a tendency to lead to genocide, ethnic cleansing, because they often will create an in-group and an out-group, saying these specific kind of people belong to this country and those other specific kind of people don't. So that could be anybody. You could say the Roma or the Gypsies or the Jews, they don't belong to this country because they're not really French, or they're not really German, or they're not really Austrian. There's something else. So that's an example of making somebody an other. By no means am I saying that you should do that. It's awful. Moving on, the U.S. is still debating our role in the world in regards to imperialism. As we do have territories still, Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Puerto Rico is in kind of a limbo state. So we're still struggling with imperialism today. And then a big question that a lot of Americans are still asking, I know I ask this of myself sometimes, but when does patriotism become nationalism? How different are they, really? And how similar are they? So, at what point does loving your country become dangerous? Is there different types of ways to love a country? And these are really big questions that won't all be answered today, but they're things that you should think about because, you guys are pretty smart. You're citizens of the United States, so you should really think about your relationship to your country. Okay, so to review imperialism. Imperialism is a way that strong countries control weaker ones through basically like military and economics. So, you have a bigger navy, you blockade the port of the smaller country, congratulations, you just gained yourself, some more power. Colonial holdings, so you want to control colonies in Africa and Asia to increase your revenue or to sell your products there. And a new facet of imperialism here is competing with other strong nations over colonial holdings. So no longer are you just dominating weaker nations, but now you actually have to fight the other big nations over like a power balance. So France will fight Germany or like Prussia, and then Britain will fight against the Russians. So it's going to be kind of a free-for-all for a while in imperialism. Here's that example again of the pre-war African continent where it's split up all over the place. You've got Belgium here, the French are controlling large swaths of this area in Africa. You've got the British all over here, Egypt, very important area, and South Africa. And then lastly, I did want to show you guys the competition. So when I say competing, what I really mean is fighting with each other. So this is going to be like the older style of combat that you don't see in World War One, where you have these old-fashioned cannons, rifles that have to be one-shot loaded, stuff like that. And this is a portrait of the Light Brigade, the Charge of the Light Brigade. This is a famous painting of when the British cavalry charged Russians. It did not go well. Turns out charging cavalry into cannons normally doesn't end well for the cavalry, in case any of you guys, ride horses. Moving on. So, how is this an example of imperialism? What we have here is a postage stamp from Canada, and you have the royal crown up here. It's from Christmas 1898, and it says, "We hold a vaster empire than has ever been, or than has been." So, a famous quote that the British will use a lot is, "An empire on which the sun never sets," meaning there's a part of the world that is always that always has sunlight that is owned by the British. So whether it's midnight, in England, somewhere around the world, there are English citizens seeing sunlight because England controls parts of Southeast Asia, Australia, islands in the Pacific, islands in the Atlantic, islands in the Caribbean, parts of Africa, India, and of course, parts of Ireland and the Canadian area here. So over here, you've got a list of all their different territories in a giant wreath. It makes it seem very nice and peaceful and lovely. But, if you've learned anything from history this far, it's you don't make an empire by making a ton of friends. You normally have to go to war with people or destroy other countries or nations that are weaker than you. Very unfortunate. So, nationalism. Nationalism is kind of like some other concepts that we've talked about. But nationalism is a fanatical devotion to one's country. So it's kind of like patriotism on steroids. I don't know if that's a good example, but basically, patriotism being love of one's country, nationalism being fanatical devotion to one's country. So you reject the idea of a nation as a group of different types of ethnic groups, meaning like if you were nationalist about, let's say, the United States, and you only believed that one type of people, and that would be white people, would be part of the nation, the United States. That would be nationalist, white nationalist, meaning you only believe that white people belong in the nation. So you can have that with different countries as well. You can have that even in Japan, where you might have the Japanese Empire saying that they are the superior race, that they are the superior empire, and that others should be subjected to them. So this isn't something that's unique to Europe, but it definitely does happen a lot in Europe. There's also this belief that a nation should be a single ethnic group. Like I said, that is going to come back later with World War II and Hitler. And this is a problem also because it's going to heighten national rivalries. So if you have a fanatical devotion to your country and your neighbor has a fanatical devotion to their country, and you both think that you're the better country, that's going to cause some problems because if you're already, pumped full of weapons and guns and ammunition and boats and planes, and all you need is a spark to fight, okay, maybe not planes, but still, you get the point, then having a heightened national rivalry will only increase the chances that you're going to get into a major conflict. So this is a famous quote by Albert Einstein saying that nationalism is an infantile disease. It is the measles of mankind. And the political cartoon is showing a man with a nationalist banner marching all these people in unison directly off a cliff. So that's just a visual for you there. And then nationalism can lead to groups like this. So when I was talking earlier about rejecting the idea of different types of ethnic groups, we have that here. These are neo-Nazis, and this is an extreme nationalism. So they've got different banners and symbols, and they have, I don't know, really terrible fashion sense. Moving on, destabilizing old empires. So there are a couple older empires that are going to suffer as a result of nationalism. So if you're a multi-ethnic, multinational empire, and now you have people calling for nationalism, it's going to fracture your empire. So the Ottoman Empire is a great example of this because they had been around for centuries. They've gone through many different evolutions. I would love to, take a whole semester to talk about the Ottoman Empire, but I can't. They have an extensive system of religious freedom, or they had an extensive religious freedom system, and they had multicultural cities and towns, meaning like if you're a Christian living in the Ottoman Empire, even though it's a Muslim empire, you would be allowed to live in your community and have self-rule. So you would have a Christian judge, a Christian teacher, You would live with fellow Christians, but you'd be subjects of the Ottoman Empire. The most you would face is a tax called a zakat. So Austria-Hungary and Serbia are an example of where nationalism can fracture societies. So Serbia, who's going to be a key player in the beginning of World War I, became independent in 1878. You don't need to know that date. But what it did do is it threatened to gain territory and show up the old empire, Austria-Hungary. So that does not make them very happy. It's going to destabilize Austria-Hungary because Serbia is going to say, if you are Serbian, you belong with us. You're a national Serb. So that means that Serbians living in Austria-Hungary might not be as loyal to that government. So that's going to tick off the Austro-Hungarians. And lastly, I mentioned this earlier, rise of nationalism usually threatens ethnic minorities, because if you're saying to your people that there's only one type of ethnicity that is viable or that is good, that threatens the people that you leave out. Automatically it does. If you were to say that everybody is great that comes from Europe or America, and you leave out people from Southeast Asia or Africa, then those people are threatened by that rise in nationalism. And then lastly, this is what ends up happening with over-the-top nationalism. This is the pistol that Archduke Ferdinand will be assassinated with. I will go more into this next week when we get into the war actually starting and things heating up. But that is all I have for you today. So if you guys have any other questions for me, don't hesitate to email me, and don't forget to stay safe and be healthy.